Hi there, I'm Linda, a 53-year-old who's pretty much seen it all. Living off the interest from some stocks I was lucky enough to invest in, life's been comfortable, if not a bit too quiet at times. My husband, David, works his tail off as a department head at some insurance company. He's the kind who brings his work home, always on the phone or buried in papers. Then there's our son, Ethan, sharp as a tack and a lawyer to boot. A year back, he married Sarah, a nurse with a smile that could light up a room, but there's something about her that just rubs me the wrong way. They've been living with us since they got hitched. Honestly, I thought they'd have moved out by now, but here we are. The house feels smaller these days, if you know what I mean. One evening, we were all sitting in the living room. Ethan was fiddling with his phone, Sarah was knitting something that was probably meant to be a scarf, and David was half watching the news, half asleep. "So, Mom," Ethan started, putting down his phone. "I think it's time we started looking for our own place." I almost jumped out of my seat. "Well, it's about time. I'll help you look. A nice little house, maybe near the park." But Sarah cut in, "Actually, Linda, I was thinking. I really like it here. It's cozy, and well, we save a lot on rent." Her voice was sweet, too sweet. It sounded fake. I glanced at David, expecting him to back me up, but instead, he surprised me. "Yeah, Linda, let them stay. It's nice having the house full." I frowned. "David, they're grown-ups. They need their space, and frankly, so do we." David shrugged. "I don't mind them here. Besides, Ethan, you're saving for that fancy car, right? Staying here helps with that." Ethan looked uncomfortable, glancing at Sarah, who was now smiling at her knitting like it was the best thing in the world. "Look, I don't want to be a burden," Ethan mumbled. "Bah, you're no burden." David waved his hand. "Right, Linda?" I sighed, feeling outnumbered. "Fine. Stay if you must. But don't blame me if you start feeling cramped." Sarah looked up, her eyes too bright. "Oh, Linda, you're the best mother-in-law ever." Her words felt like syrup, thick and too sugary. I forced a smile, but inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. David, always so keen on having our own space, suddenly doing a 180? And Sarah, always polite, but something about her eagerness seemed off. Lately, I've been feeling run down, like all my energy's just drained away. Getting out of bed feels like a chore, and I'm tired all the time. It's not like me at all. I used to be the first one up, bustling around the house, but these days, I can barely muster the strength to get through the day. It was a typical Thursday evening. Ethan was working late, and David had his weekly poker game, leaving just Sarah and me at home. She was in the kitchen, humming as she always does, preparing our evening tea. I sat at the dining table, listlessly flipping through a magazine, feeling too exhausted to even stand up and join her. "Here's your tea, Linda," Sarah said cheerfully, placing a steaming mug before me. "I made your favorite chamomile." I managed a weak smile. "Thank you, dear." But as soon as I took a sip, I frowned. The tea was bitter, unusually so. "Sarah, does this taste bitter to you?" I asked, pushing the mug away slightly. She took a quick sip from her cup and then from mine, her eyebrows knitting together in confusion. "It tastes fine to me, Linda. Maybe your taste buds are playing tricks because you're not feeling well." I wanted to believe her, but something didn't sit right with me. The next day, I decided to bring it up with David. He was in the kitchen, a rare sight, making himself a sandwich with an almost comical level of concentration. Sipping my coffee, I ventured, "David, have you noticed anything strange about the tea Sarah makes? It tasted bitter to me." He paused, sandwich halfway to his mouth, and looked at me as if I'd just said the sky was falling. "Bitter? What do you mean? Her tea is always perfect. Are you sure you're not just imagining things because you're feeling sick?" His reaction was so intense, so immediate, it took me aback. "No, I'm certain it was bitter. It's been like that for a few days now." He put his sandwich down, his eyes narrowing. Linda, it's probably just your illness talking. Sarah's tea is fine. In fact, it's more than fine, it's the best I've had. His defense of Sarah's tea was so fervent, so passionate, that it left me speechless. Was I really imagining it? But no, the bitterness was real, I was sure of it. That evening, when Ethan came home, he seemed worn out, the stress of his job written all over his face. Sarah, ever the attentive daughter-in-law, brought in a tray of tea, saying, "This will help you unwind." Ethan took a sip and then another, making no comment about the taste. It seemed to me like he didn't notice anything off. I tried my tea again, and sure enough, it was bitter. I couldn't understand why I was the only one tasting it. "Doesn't this taste bitter to you, Ethan?" I asked, hoping for some validation. He shook his head. "Tastes normal to me, Mom." Sarah just smiled and said, "Maybe Linda's right, and it's just her feeling under the weather." But I wasn't convinced. Why was the tea bitter only for me? And why was David so quick to dismiss my concerns? There was something odd going on, and I was determined to find out what it was. The mystery of the bitter tea had turned my home into a scene straight out of a detective show. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to keep a close eye on Sarah, especially when she was preparing our evening tea. With Ethan at work and David out for the day, it was the perfect opportunity to do a bit of sleuthing. I positioned myself at the kitchen table with a magazine, pretending to be engrossed in an article. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched Sarah bustling around the kitchen. She had this way of moving, smooth and precise, like she knew exactly what she was doing. Today, her movements seemed even more calculated. As she reached for the tea canister, her eyes darted around, ensuring she was alone. It was then I saw her slip a small vial from her pocket and discreetly add a few drops into the tea meant for me. My heart skipped a beat. So, I was right all along. I waited for her to leave the kitchen. The moment she stepped out, I sprang into action, swapping the mugs with a swift, careful motion. The adrenaline was pumping through my veins. I felt like a secret agent in one of those spy movies Ethan loves. Returning to my seat, I tried to appear calm as she came back, handing me the special tea with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Here you go, Linda. Enjoy." I nodded, my hands trembling slightly. "Thank you, Sarah." We sipped our tea in silence. I watched her, pretending to take small sips from my cup. Soon, her eyes began to droop, a clear sign the sleeping agent was taking effect. Within minutes, she was slumped over the table, fast asleep. I was in shock. My daughter-in-law, whom I had welcomed into my home, was drugging me. But why? My mind was racing with questions. I knew I had to act quickly while she was still asleep. Cautiously, I searched her purse and found the vial. The label read, "Strong Sleep Aid, prescription only." My hands shook as I held it. This was serious stuff, not something you'd find at the local drugstore. Now the question was, what to do next? Do I confront her when she wakes up? Or should I call Ethan? But what would I even say? "Hey, your wife's been drugging your mother." It sounded absurd, and yet it was the reality. I glanced at Sarah, still fast asleep, and realized I needed evidence, something concrete before making any accusations. I started with her phone. I know, not the most ethical move, but desperate times call for desperate measures. I felt like a cat burglar as I tiptoed over to where her phone was charging on the kitchen counter. My hands were shaking as I picked it up, half expecting it to explode or something. The phone was unlocked, which was lucky for me. I went straight to her messages, and that's when my heart nearly stopped. There, clear as day, was a string of messages between Sarah and my husband, David. My David. And let me tell you, they weren't chatting about the weather or what to have for dinner. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut as I read those messages. They were planning something terrible. The words blurred before my eyes, but the gist of it was clear, they were having an affair. And not just that, they were plotting against me. David had insured my life and, together with Sarah, planned to stage a car accident to cash in on the policy. My own husband and daughter-in-law, scheming right under my nose. I must have been standing there for ages, just staring at the phone in disbelief. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway snapped me out of it. It was Ethan, coming home from work. I shoved the phone back on the counter, my mind racing. What was I going to do? Confront them right then and there? No, I needed to be smart about this. I needed proof, solid proof. Ethan walked in, looking tired but happy to be home. Hey, Mom, what's up? Why is Sarah asleep at the table? I forced a smile, feeling like my world was crumbling around me. Oh, she wasn't feeling well. Decided to take a little nap. Ethan raised an eyebrow but didn't question it further. Okay, weird, but alright. I'm gonna go freshen up. After he left the room, I went back to Sarah's phone. I needed evidence, something I could use to expose this whole twisted plot. I started taking pictures of their messages with my phone. My hands were shaking so bad, the photos were all blurry, but I managed to get a few clear ones. Then I heard Sarah stirring. I quickly put her phone back and pretended to be busy in the kitchen. My heart was pounding so loud, I was sure she could hear it. Sarah groggily sat up, rubbing her eyes. What happened? Why am I asleep? I turned to face her, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. You must have been really tired, dear. You fell asleep right at the table. She looked confused but didn't question it further. Oh, okay. That's strange. I nodded, keeping my face as neutral as possible. Yeah, strange. As I watched her stumble out of the room, a million thoughts raced through my head. How was I going to confront David and Sarah about this? What was I going to tell Ethan? My family, my whole life, felt like a lie. Armed with the screenshots from Sarah's phone, my mind was set. I had to confront David. This wasn't just about a fling or a misguided crush, they were plotting against me. My hands were shaking, but this time with anger, not fear. David walked in later that evening, looking as calm as ever. Seeing him act so normal boiled my blood. I was in the kitchen, pretending to be busy with dinner, but my mind was on one thing only, confrontation. Hey, Linda, David greeted casually as he hung his coat. Something smells good. What's for dinner? I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. We need to talk, David. Now. He looked surprised but nodded, following me into the living room. What's going on, Linda? You look upset. I threw the screenshots down on the table in front of him. Upset? That's an understatement. Care to explain these? David's face went from confused to pale as he picked up my phone and scrolled through the messages. Linda, I can explain. Explain? Explain how you and Sarah are planning to betray me? How you're having an affair right under my nose? My voice was shaking with rage. He tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away. Linda, it's not what it seems. Please, let me explain. I snorted in disbelief. Not what it seems. It's pretty clear to me. You're cheating on me with my son's wife. And there's more, isn't there? What are you planning, David? What are these messages about drugging me? David's eyes darted around, looking for an escape. It's complicated, Linda. You wouldn't understand. Try me, I said, my voice icy. I think I deserve at least that much. He ran a hand through his hair, sighing. It started as a fling. We didn't mean for it to go this far. But then, things got out of hand. Out of hand? You call drugging your wife and plotting behind her back just out of hand? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. David looked down, unable to meet my eyes. I'm sorry, Linda. I never meant to hurt you. Sorry doesn't cut it, David. This is unforgivable. I felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. I trusted you, and you were planning to. What? Get rid of me. He didn't answer, just sat there, looking guilty as sin. Where's Ethan? Does he know about this? The thought of our son being involved in this mess was too much. David shook his head quickly. No, Ethan doesn't know anything. This was just between me and Sarah. Just between you and Sarah, I repeated, the words tasting bitter. I need to think. I can't be around you right now. I grabbed my coat and keys, heading for the door. David tried to stop me, but I brushed past him. Don't. I can't even look at you right now. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed space, needed to breathe. The walls of the house felt like they were closing in on me. As I drove, the tears started to flow, blurring my vision. My life, as I knew it, was falling apart. After I had gathered my thoughts at the park, I knew it was time to face the music. My phone buzzed with a call from Ethan, his voice tinged with worry. Mom, where are you? Sarah's frantic, and Dad looks like he's seen a ghost. What's happening? I sighed, feeling a knot in my stomach. Ethan, we need to talk. It's about your father and Sarah. Can you meet me at the park? The urgency in my voice must have hit him. I'm on my way, Mom. When Ethan arrived at the park, his face was etched with concern. I didn't beat around the bush. I showed him the screenshots from Sarah's phone. His reaction was a mix of disbelief and anger. This can't be true. Dad and Sarah, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. It's hard, I know, but we need to confront them, together, I said, my voice steady. Ethan's jaw clenched as he nodded. Let's go back home. The drive back was tense, each of us lost in our turbulent thoughts. As we walked into the house, David and Sarah were sitting together, looking like they were bracing for a storm. Ethan, usually so calm and collected, was the first to break the silence. How could you both do this? To Mom, to me. Sarah's face crumbled, tears spilling over. Ethan, I'm sorry, I never meant for any of this. Save your apologies, Sarah. They mean nothing now, I interjected, my voice cold. David stood up, his face pale. Linda, please, let's talk about this. I can explain. I shook my head, the evidence burning a hole in my pocket. Explain? You betrayed me, our son, our family. There's no coming back from this. Ethan's voice was laced with betrayal. And you, Sarah, my wife, involved in this deceit. Sarah reached out to Ethan, but he recoiled. Don't touch me. I can't even stand to look at you. It was then that we heard the front door open. We all turned to see two police officers entering the house. David's and Sarah's faces went from fearful to outright terrified. They knew their secret was out, and the consequences were here to face them. The officers approached them, their expressions stern. David and Sarah, you need to come with us. There are serious allegations against you both. David's voice was barely a whisper. Allegations? What allegations? I stepped forward, holding up my phone. These allegations. Betrayal, plotting, deceit. As the officers handcuffed them, the look of terror on David's and Sarah's faces was something I'll never forget. It was the look of people who realized their world had just crumbled. The house felt eerily quiet after David and Sarah were taken away by the police. Ethan and I sat in the living room, the weight of the day's events pressing down on us. Ethan broke the silence first. Mom, how are you holding up? I mean, after everything. I sighed deeply, the events of the day replaying in my mind. I'm not sure, Ethan. Betrayed, angry, confused, a bit of everything, I guess. How about you? He leaned back, rubbing his temples. It's like a bad dream, Mom. I can't believe Sarah and Dad. It's just too much to take in. I reached over, giving his hand a reassuring squeeze. We'll get through this, Ethan. It's going to be tough, but we're strong. We can handle it. He nodded, a determined look crossing his face. Yeah, we've got each other, at least. That counts for something. I smiled, feeling a surge of maternal pride. It counts for a lot, Ethan. We're a team, you and I. We spent the next few hours talking, really talking, about everything we'd been through. It was a conversation long overdue, one filled with honesty and raw emotions. We shared our feelings of betrayal, our fears about the future, and our hopes for what was to come. "I've been thinking, Mom," Ethan said after a pause. "Maybe it's time for some changes. For both of us." I nodded in agreement. "Changes like what?" "Maybe start with the house. It feels tainted now. Maybe we should sell it, find somewhere new to start fresh." The idea was both scary and exciting. "That's a big step, but you might be right. A new beginning could be good for us." "And what about you, Mom? What will you do now?" Ethan asked, concern in his eyes. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of determination rising within me. "I think I'll start by rediscovering who I am, apart from your father. Maybe pick up some old hobbies, find new interests. I've always wanted to try volunteering, maybe at the community center." Ethan smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "That sounds great, Mom. And I'll be here for you, whatever you need." I felt a warm glow at his words. "And I'm here for you too, Ethan, always." We sat there for a while longer, talking about the future, about the possibilities that lay ahead. It was the first time in a long time that I felt a sense of hope, a belief that things could get better. As the day turned into evening, Ethan stood up. "I should probably head out, give you some space." I stood up too, hugging him tightly. "Thank you, Ethan. For everything. I don't know what I'd do without you." He hugged me back, just as tightly. "You'll never have to find out, Mom. I'll always be here." After he left, I sat back down, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew I wasn't alone. I had Ethan, and I had a newfound strength within me. After the whirlwind of the trial and the divorce, I found myself starting anew. The divorce was hard, but David had to pay a significant amount for the physical and moral harm he had caused. Both he and Sarah were facing real jail time. I had moved into a small, charming apartment in a quiet part of town, a place where I could start over. Ethan visited often, and on one bright Saturday afternoon, he came over to help me with my new project, setting up a small garden on my balcony. He was elbow-deep in potting soil, planting some herbs. "You seem to be doing really well, Mom," he commented, looking around at my new place. I smiled, watering a small tomato plant. "I am, Ethan. It's been tough, but I'm finding my way. And the volunteering at the community center is really fulfilling." He smiled back, clearly relieved. "That's great to hear, Mom. After everything, you deserve to find some happiness." We worked together in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the simplicity of the task. Then Ethan said, "I'm thinking about trying to date again. It's time to move on, you know?" I nodded, pleased for him. "Just take it slow, Ethan. And remember, honesty is key in any relationship." As we finished with the garden, Ethan stood and stretched. "I'm really proud of you, Mom. You've come through so much." I stood up too, feeling a sense of accomplishment. "Thanks, Ethan. You've been my rock through all of this." He hugged me tightly. "Always, Mom. You're not just my mom, you're one of the strongest people I know." Looking out over the balcony at the city below, I felt a wave of contentment wash over me. The past months had been some of the hardest of my life, but they had also shown me my own strength.